This is the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Your hosts are Seth Jacobson and Patrick Heiler.
Hi, I'm Seth.
And I'm Patrick.
This chapter a little bit out of order because we did chapter 5 and we went so long on chapter 5 that we didn't do chapter 6. But then the next time we sat down, we actually did chapter 7, 8.
We just did our regular flow and had forgotten that we didn't do 2 the week before.
Yeah, so we've got to go back and do chapter 6 here. Slightly out of order.
We have a system, Aradia, and if you change it slightly, we mess up.
There's a pipeline.
We do the same shit every week, yeah.
There's only one way to put out 200 plus episodes, and that's by repetition and pipelining. And we missed a step.
Seth texted me like in the middle of the week. He was like, I can't find my file for 6. He was like, I was freaking out. I
freaked out for a solid half hour.
And I was like, well, I'll check and see if I have mine. And I was like, I can't find mine either. How do we explain this? It took me like a full 2 minutes.
And then Patrick was like, I don't think we recorded that night.
It took me a while.
And I was like, oh. And then I went back and realized the episode before was like 2.5 hours long. And I was like, oh, that's why we didn't record. We went 2.5 hours on that because I was wasted. I had been drinking heavily on that one. So that's going to be fun to edit.
Well, all that being said, this is chapter 6 of Fires of Heaven, Gateways. And our symbol is Lanfear's moon and stars. Rand woke in total darkness and lay there beneath his blankets, trying to think of what had wakened him. It had been something. Not the dream. He had been teaching Avienda how to swim, in a pond in the Waterwood, back home in the Two Rivers. Something else. Then it came again, like a faint whiff of a foul miasma creeping under the door. Not a smell at all, really. A sense of otherness. But that was how it felt. Rank. Like something dead a week in stagnant water. It faded again, but not all the way this time. Tossing aside his blankets, he stood up, wrapping himself in saidin. Inside the void, filled with the power, he could feel his body shiver, but the cold seemed in another place from where he was. Cautiously, he pulled open the door and stepped out. Arched windows at either end of the corridor let in falls of moonlight. After the pitch black of his room, it was nearly like day. Nothing moved, but he could feel something coming closer. Something evil. It felt like the taint that roared through him on the power. One hand went to his coat pocket, to the small carved figure of a round little man holding a sword across his knees, an angry owl. With that, he could channel more of the power than even he could safely handle unaided. He thought it would not be necessary. Whoever had sent this attack against him did not know who they were dealing with now. They should never have let him wake. For a moment, he hesitated. He could take the fight to whoever had been sent against him, but he thought it was still below him, down where the maidens were still sleeping, by the silence. With luck, it would not bother them, unless he rushed down to battle it in their midst. That would surely wake them, and they would not stand by and watch. Lan said you should choose your own ground, if you could, and make your enemy come to you. Smiling, he raced the thud of his boots up the nearest curving stairway, on upward, until he reached the top floor. The highest level of the building was one large chamber with a slightly domed glass ceiling, and scattered thin columns fluted in spirals. Glassless arched windows all around flooded every corner with moonlight. The dust and grit and sand on the floor still faintly showed his own footprints, from the one time he had come up here, and no other mark. It was perfect. Striding to the center of the room, he planted himself atop a mosaic there, the ancient symbol of the Aes Sedai, 10 feet across. It was an apt place. Under this sign will he conquer. That was what the prophecy of Ruidian said of him. He stood straddling the sinuous dividing line, one boot on the black teardrop that was now called the Dragon's Fang, and used to represent evil, the other on the white, now called the Flame of Tarvalon. Some men said it stood for the light, an appropriate place to meet this attack, between light and darkness. The fetid feel grew stronger, and a burned sulfur smell filled the air. Suddenly, things moved, slinking away from the stairs like moon shadows, along the outside of the room. Slowly, they resolved into 3 black dogs, darker than night and big as ponies. Eyes shining silver, they circled him warily. With the power in him, he could hear their hearts beat, like deep drums pounding. He could not hear them breathe, though. Perhaps they did not. He channeled, and a sword was in his hands. Its slightly curving, heron-marked blade seemed hammered out of fire. He had expected Murdral, or something even worse than the eyeless, but for dogs, even Shadowspawn dogs, the sword would be enough. Whoever had sent him did not know him. Lan said he had very nearly reached the level of Blade Master now, and the warder was sparing enough with praise to make him think he had passed on to that level already. With snarls like bones being ground into dust, the dogs hurtled at him from 3 sides, faster than galloping horses. He did not move until they were almost on him. Then he flowed, one with the sword, move to move, as though dancing. In the blink of an eye, the sword form called Whirlwind on the Mountain became the wind blows over the wall, became unfolding the fan. Great black heads flew apart from black bodies, their dripping teeth like burnished steel, still bared as they bounced across the floor. He was already stepping from the mosaic as the dark forms collapsed in twitching, bleeding heaps. Laughing to himself, he let the sword go, though he held on to Saidin, to the raging power, the sweetness, and the taint. Contempt slid along the outside of the void. Dogs, Shadowspawn certainly, but still just... His laughter died. Slowly, the dead dogs in their heads were melting, settling into pools of liquid shadow that quivered slightly, as if alive. Their blood fanned across the floor trembled. Suddenly, the smaller pools flowed across the floor in viscous streams to merge with the larger, which oozed away from the mosaic to mount higher and higher, until the 3 black, huge dogs stood there once more, slavering and snarling as they gathered massive haunches under them.
Yeah, those are... Sorry, the chat got distracted with questioning when Rand is going to be having igloo sex with Avienda. So apparently that's chapter 31.
Not too far away.
And and you can always know whether or not Rand has lost his virginity as to whether or not he's carrying around a spear in his hand, carved with dragons. It's basically it's the dragon dick, basically. Because it is. It's like a cut-off short spear. It's like, what, like a foot long?
It's a scepter.
Yeah, it's a scepter.
Traditional symbol of power.
Totally.
For beating your enemies with. But also, you know...
There's maybe a reason.
Especially in ancient societies, yeah, it was used to represent dominance and masculinity, usually.
But the fact that he literally gets it when he loses his virginity is just too much of a coincidence.
Radius said he sheathed his sword. Oh, God.
Yes, he did. Lan taught him how to do it. So, anyway, getting back to the chapter and the nice long read you just did, we have dark hounds showing up, and these, as far as we can tell from Lanfear's later soliloquy, these are sent by Ravine.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. Really specifically because we saw in the prologue, Lanfear gets together with Ravine, Samael, Graendal, and herself. And we know that at least she tells them that she has a plan to get Rand to move over to the Shadow.
Right.
And it seems weird that they would come from Ravine. Well, I should say this a little differently. I wonder what the actual purpose of this attack was. I guess I suspect that there's some subterfuge happening here, but I don't know what happened or why. Because Lanfear shows up in a little while, in a minute here.
So yeah, and her explanation is that when Rand sent essentially humanitarian aid into Cairhien, Ravine, he's got Caemlyn under his control. He has Morghese. His next goal is to take Morghese and her claim to the Cairhienan throne, which is how Elaine ends up taking it. and basically taking the throne of Carienne and using her to take over both countries. And
Right.
so his next step is to step into Carienne and take it over. And he sees Rand sending forces up from Tyr to give humanitarian aid as a threat to him stepping into Carienne and taking it over. And so what he sees is, hey, we're in this direct conflict where your soldiers are entering the same country that I'm trying to take over. And so normally I'd be fine to sit aside and gather power, but you're threatening me, therefore I'm sending dark hounds after you. That's Lanfear's explanation, and it sounds pretty accurate as far as I can tell. Like, I really can't poke any holes in it.
It does sound plausible.
Yeah.
Yes, and I can't figure out for what other reason they would bother attacking Rand.
Mm-hmm.
Or Ravine personally.
And they could be sent by, there's a couple of times where, like, I think, in particular, Matt's girlfriend, the black friend Aiel.
Dark friend.
Woman, dark friend Aiel.
Melindra.
Melindra, yes. She is, I think she's actually not working, even though she has the bees, the 9 bees on her hilt and dagger that looks like she's working for Samuel. I think she's actually a dark friend for Ravine. I don't remember exactly what that thing is, but they often,
yes.
A lot of times they will make the attack look like it's coming from a different Forsaken, so that if Rand seeks vengeance, he goes after someone else.
Yeah, we talked about this specifically at some point recently, maybe when we were introduced to Melindra. Yeah, I always just assumed that was Ravine making it look like Samael sent an attacker so that Rand will go after him first rather than Ravine.
Exactly. Yeah, that's my guess as well. But these Darkhounds are pretty... They're not like, they don't have like sigils or anything. They're just Darkhounds.
Yeah.
They seem like just an assassination force.
And we know they go after Rand and Matt, which we'll see in a moment.
Right. And this is the first of 2 times that Rand saves Matt's life from Ravine with balefire.
Yes, that's true. Didn't think of it that way. And they reform and attack again, and he just like slashes at them with a wave of balefire and removes them from the pattern, burns their threads. And just then Moraine says, "Did any of them bite you or bleed on you?" And he spins around.
We've talked a little bit how there's 2 types of Darkhounds. There's seems to be the kind that can be taken out with physical weapons, right? There's the Perrin takes one out with, or appears to take one out with arrows.
Yes.
And we see, just this idea that there are some Darkhounds that can die from regular arrows. But Rand turns these into mincemeat, and they just flow right back together. So these seem to be either an upgraded or a more advanced or just a different kind of Darkhound.
We see Rand thinking in a moment about old legends. Let's see. The tales he had heard said Darkhounds ran the night in the wild hunt, with the Dark One himself as the hunter. They left no print even on the softest dirt, only stone. They would not stop until you faced and defeated them or put running water between you. Crossroads were supposed to be particularly dangerous places to meet them, and the time just after sunset or before sunrise. And I don't know if that's ever confirmed, but that makes me wonder if there's only one type of Darkhound, and it depends on where they are, what they're doing, what time it is.
I always assumed that was pretty mythical, that most of that is just like legend and bullshit.
I thought at least a lot of it is, yeah. But of course the last sentence is, he had seen enough old stories walking by now to believe any of it could be true. So
sure.
Yeah, tough to say if there's 2 different types or if they're I'm looking at what Aradia is saying. He's standing between dark and light, ultimate crossroads, as he stands on the mosaic. Mm-hmm. It's also interesting to, I guess, at least note that when the Darkhounds are like liquefied after he kills them, they flow away from the seal and reform
away from the crossroads
and reform on the outside of it, like they're averse to being on the sign itself, which I don't know if that's supposed to mean anything or not either. Or maybe they're just retreating a little.
And it is the middle of the night, which could make a big difference in terms of their power.
Yeah.
They could be more powerful now. I think when Perrin was shooting arrows, when the whole group, when Moraine ended up bale firing that group, So certainly Balefire works and is the most reliable thing against dark hounds, but maybe that group was attacking during the day, and so they are more susceptible to regular human arrows. That would explain the difference. We've also speculated the difference is like, because we know dark hounds are converted wolves, and we talked a little bit, again, in pure speculation, that maybe Slayer has something to do with converting them, and therefore he,
collects them.
Yeah, or there's something weird like that, yeah. But we do know that, a dark hound who has been, a wolf that has been killed by dark hounds turns into a dark hound. Did we want to talk about what Moraine said at all? She just mentions a drop on the skin can kill slowly with a great deal of pain at the end, which is what she heals Matt from.
Right.
There's a little bit of foreshadowing even within the chapter.
She's also trying to warn Rand about Balefire, but that's the beginning of my read. "We must speak of what you used to kill them," Moraine began, but he was already running as hard as he could. Because she gives him a hint. Moraine says that you were really lucky that there was only 3 of them. They usually hunt in packs of 10 or a dozen or so. And then Rand realizes that there probably was a whole pack and only 3 of them were sent to distract him.
Which makes me think that maybe he wasn't the actual target? If they only sent 3 after him and they sent, a lot more after Matt.
Trying to kill Matt?
Yeah.
In a more serious way? 3 to distract Rand and a group to assassinate Matt while Rand is busy. I like it. I think that's plausible. Also, if the goal amongst those 4 Forsaken I mentioned earlier, Samael, Grendel, Ravine, and Lanfear, if the idea is to drive Rand to the shadow, killing Matt, I think, would be an excellent first step at destroying Rand.
Right, and they talk about cutting if you cut one leg out of the tripod, the stool falls over type thing.
Yeah.
It's if you can take out one of his 2 support folks, you come a long way towards succeeding in the Dark One's goals without killing Rand, which is, clearly not always in the Dark One's interest.
Anyway, I'll actually start the read now. "We must speak of what you used to kill them," Moraine began, but he was already running as hard as he could, ignoring her cries to know where he was going and why. Down flights of stairs, through darkened corridors where sleepy maidens, roused by the pounding of boots, peered at him in consternation from moonlit rooms. Through the front doors, where Lan stood restlessly with the 2 women on guard, his color-shifting warder's cloak about his shoulders, making parts of him seem to blend into the night. "Where's Moraine?" he shouted, as Rand dashed by, but Rand leapt down the broad steps 2 at a time without replying.
Shouldn't he be able to know that from his warder bond? I guess it's more just he knows she's up there. Why are you running without her?
Yeah, why didn't she follow? The half-healed wound in his side clenched like a fist, pain he was only vaguely aware of inside the void by the time he reached the building he sought. It stood at the very edge of Ruidian, far from the plaza, as far from the camp Moraine shared with the Wise Ones as it was possible to be and remain in the city. The upper floors had collapsed in a mound of rubble that fanned out onto the cracked earth beyond the pavement. Only the bottom 2 floors remained whole. Refusing his body's effort to hunch over around the pane, he went in, still at a dead run. Once the great antechamber, encircled by a stone balcony, had been tall. Now it was taller, open to the night sky, its pale stone floor strewn with rubble from the collapse. In the moon shadows beneath the balcony, 3 dark hounds were up on their hind legs, clawing and chewing at a bronze-clad door that shivered under their assault. The smell of burned sulfur hung strong in the air. Remembering what had happened before, Rand darted to one side as he channeled, the shaft of liquid white fire streaking by the door as it destroyed the shadow spawn. He had tried to make it less this time, to confine the destruction to the dark hounds, but the thick wall at the far end of the chamber had a shadowed hole in it, not all the way through, he thought. It was hard to tell by moonlight, but he would have to find his control of this weapon. The bronze sheathing on the door was tattered and torn, as though the teeth and toenails of the dark hounds really had been steel. Lamplight shone through a number of small holes. There were paw prints on the floor stones, but surprisingly few. Releasing Sidene, he found a place where he would not cut his hands to shreds and pounded on the door, Suddenly, the pain in his side was very real and present. He took a deep breath and tried to thrust it away. "Matt, it's me, Rand. Open up, Matt." After a moment, the door opened a crack, letting out a spill of lamplight. Matt peered through doubtfully, then pulled the door wider, leaning against it, as if he had run 10 miles carrying a sack of rocks. Except for his silver foxhead medallion hanging around his neck, its eyes shaped and shaded like the ancient Aes Sedai symbol, he was naked. The way Matt felt about Aes Sedai, Rand was surprised he had not sold the thing long since. Deeper in the room, a tall, golden-haired woman was calmly wrapping a blanket around herself, a maiden, by the spears and buckler, lying at her feet. Rand hastily averted his eyes and cleared his throat. "I just wanted to make sure you're all right." "We're fine." Uneasily, Matt looked around the antechamber. "Now we are. You killed it. Or something?" "I don't want to know what it was, as long as it's gone. It's bloody hard on a man sometimes being your friend. Not only a friend, another Taveran, and perhaps a key to victory in Tarmangadan. Anyone who wanted to strike at Rand had reason to strike at Matt as well. But Matt always tried to deny both things. They're gone, Matt. Dark hounds. 3 of them." "I told you I don't want to know," Matt groaned.
It's like, I don't know, I was nearly killed by dark hounds.
I don't want to know what the fuck just happened.
That's so typical, Matt.
Matt also says, I highlighted, "If I hadn't been on my feet for a drink of wine when the door started to open, ... He trailed off, shivering.
Lucky.
Yeah.
Very lucky. So, we see the half-healed wound in Rand's side clenching, and he hasn't physically really exerted himself. I mean, I guess he ran down to Matt's hotel, but it's not like the fight was really that crazy. He pretty much cut them to pieces and then burned them with the power.
Right.
Like, it wasn't an extended fight, and it wasn't an extended run, and yet still that wound in his side is clenching, and I have to assume it's somehow the corruption of the Dark Hounds, which is resonating.
Yeah, it could have to do with a resonance factor, or just that he filled himself up with the power using the Siddhartha Angriel, as I like to call it. The little fat man with a sword. Have we established whether or not being near Taint or Mashadar or anything like that can fire it up too?
I don't think Mashadar does. I don't think Shadow Loga. Not until, he gets slashed by Fane. But, I honestly think it's just exposure to the Dark One's taint. More so than any of the other... Yeah,
I think so too.
Yeah. So I have to assume it's just the corrupted Dark Hounds.
It does make me wonder if it could have to do with the Dark Hounds, but I think it's probably just the channeling.
Oh, I assume it's the Dark Hounds.
Yeah? Does anyone want to chime in? Could be either or both. Moraine arrives, holding up her skirts and sprinting, and lands right behind her. For a small woman, she sure can move when she needs to. Short little legs are... Moraine arrives. Like I said, land right behind her, and Matt starts talking about how his arm itches like fire, like poison ivy or something. And Moraine rushes over to him and tries to heal him. And Matt just says, "Bloody thing's cold as ice all of a sudden," he muttered. "What are you doing, Moraine? If you want to do something, heal this itch. It's my whole arm now." Jerk. His right arm was red from wrist to shoulder and had begun to look puffy. Moraine stares at him with a startled expression Rand had never seen on her face. Maybe the only one. "I will," she said slowly. "If the medallion is cold, take it off." And Matt does, and then the healing works, and he yells some more. But she, clearly the first time she's ever encountered anything like that.
So I feel like we get a couple of clues here when Matt's memories basically tell him, hey, you got bitten and slobbered on, and that's a bad thing, even though he's only got like a drop of saliva on his arm.
Yes.
He says, "When I was putting everything I had in holding this door shut, I could have sworn one of them had chewed a hole right through it. I could see its bloody head and its teeth. Melinda's spear didn't even faze it." That line, I mean, it stuck his whole head through the door. It got stabbed with a spear. Matt got bit. Like, it was a whole big thing.
Yes. but Rand balefired it and probably saved his life because
Totally.
Rand brought the timeline of the Dark Hound back far enough that it maybe only a little slobber dropped on his arm rather than a full-on bite or something.
And Moraine states just in the earlier scene, like, did you get bit? Because if you did, not even my healing would be fast. You'd be dead instantly. Even if I was standing right there, you'd still die. Like, I couldn't have healed you fast enough.
Right.
So my bet is that Matt was either dead or seconds away from dying. One of the many times in which he dies. That is a good question. I don't think he ever died, but could his connection with the Horn of Valir have been severed in this scene if he had died from the Darkhound slobber?
I don't think so, because his body would have to die. So even, like, in the battle with Ravine, Matt dies, and then Rand slams Ravine with such a huge bout, or gout, or whatever you want to call that, of balefire, that it reverses time by quite a while. You know what I mean? So Matt is back alive and does not remember dying.
That's a good point. He doesn't remember dying.
I think Rand just rewound time long enough that the damage was not so bad that Matt dies. Although I think if Moraine did nothing, he still would have died.
Yes, it would have taken a long time, but she says even a drop of saliva can cause you to die, and it's a long, slow, agonizing death without Aes Sedai healing.
Moraine hears his complaint about his arm itching while Matt's complaining loudly, and she rushes over and just grabs his head and tries to heal him, and Matt's just like, the medallion's colder than anything right now, and he's like, aren't you going to heal me, though? And she just stares at him, and she says,
if it's cold, why don't you take it off?
Matt frowned at her, then finally pulled it over his head and laid it beside him. Then she takes his head again, and the healing works.
Which, I mean, obviously we know from all the lore about the medallion is that basically she tried to channel and the flows just fell apart. And in response to that, the medallion got cold. So that's the first time that either of them realizes the medallion...
What it does.
What it does, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's... He thinks back on it and figures it out later, but this scene does end up cluing him in to what the medallion actually does. And she realizes immediately. Because, Moraine knows.
Yeah. She's smart.
But this is actually one of the few times that Matt actually ever gets healed, now that I think about it. He avoids healing frequently.
He hates it.
He hates it. And, this is, once he realizes what the medallion does, he suffers a lot of wounds and stitches. What is it? Narum stitches him up as often as he stitches up his cloaks, right? Even though he has access to healing, he doesn't use it.
Blood and ashes. Does it have to be that flaming way every flaming time? It was just a bloody itch, Matt says after he was healed. You watch your tongue with me.
And I'd also like to agree with Sakan here. Moraine acting visibly surprised is the same as everyone else being like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Yeah, she looks surprised. That's such a big deal for Moraine to look that way.
Thank you. Is that a Telmanas quote, Sakan? My lord is not a side of beef. Thank you, my lord, for pointing that out to me. Narum?
Narum, yeah, totally. His, what does he call him? I was going to say groomsman, but that would be for the horses.
Oh, manservant.
Manservant, that's right.
My lord is not a side of beef. Noted.
And he's always like, do you have to get blood on all of your clothes? You know how hard blood is to wash out?
It's just, just a suggestion. Maybe don't bleed so much. Oh, Nin says reminds me of the guy from Fresh Prince, Jeffrey, the butler. He's a great character.
Just a little bit of that sarcasm thrown in while helping out. Jeffrey has more than a little bit of sarcasm thrown in there, but
I haven't watched Fresh Prince in years. I just pulled that, like, easily. Jeffrey, of course.
Of course. That's actually pretty damn impressive. I mean, I watched a lot of Fresh Prince, but I would not have pulled that up out of memory.
Oh, I watched Fresh Prince every day for, I think it would be 5 days a week when it was aired. Gosh, I don't remember on which network here in the States, but it would air, like, I think Full House came on, and then Family Matters, and then Fresh Prince. There was a couple more that I'm not thinking of off the top of my head, but it was a whole lineup that was awesome. That's right, Obscura is on TV after school. I see they did the same thing in Australia. In any case, moving forward here.
Can you hear me? Okay. Melindra turns to Moraine and goes, "He's my little mischief maker now," and like ruffles his hair. And I couldn't help but think like, oh, Loki, the mischief maker. Yes. After he goes to the doorway, he goes in as a farm boy and he comes out as Loki.
He's my little mischief maker now. From the horrified look on Matt's face, he was gathering his strength to run. Rand became aware of soft, amused chuckles behind him. The maidens, shufas and veils around their shoulders now, had crowded around and were peering into the room. "Teach him to sing, Spear Sister," Adela said, and the other maidens crowed with laughter. This has happened before.
We all know Aiel men don't sing.
Right. Unless they're
making certain noises.
Apparently, there's no nicer way to say that.
No.
Then they might be a singing.
Spoilers. I think Christine's having a sudden realization.
Yeah, teach him to sing. Because everybody wasn't aware that they were hooking up. And this it's one of their first nights together. So they haven't, it may not be well known at this point. But when all the maidens there and they look into the room, they're like, oh, I see what was happening there. Matt and Melindra are both naked. Matt's has managed to drag his pants on, and Melindra's just standing there with a blanket wrapped around her.
I was going to say she managed to drag her shufa on, but that was pretty much it.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on between the maidens and the joking and the Karn is not a Wetlander king, that sort of typical banter where he tells them to do something and they're like, no.
I think Matt asks, or rather Rand asks the maidens to go ahead and go back to their roof, and they just don't. They just continue standing around there. And at some point Matt says, or God, I keep doing that. At some point Rand says, "Do you think this is a joke or just decide to go in your own good time?" And Adelin, who's one of the elder Spear Sisters, she seems to be a leader amongst them. It's hard to find parallels with ranks, but in any case, she responds, "We will go as you direct, but this is not the dance. Besides," and she says, you didn't really give us the order. You just kind of suggested maybe this would be a good idea, is what she's saying. And she's also saying, yeah, we'll follow you in battle, but this isn't battle. So, chill out. Even the Karakarn is not a Wetlander king, a gray-haired maiden said.
So they take off, and you're left with Moraine and Lan. And Moraine's like, "I gotta talk to you about something." And basically, I think she wants to talk to him about the balefire, not the medallion.
It's what she's been trying to get at.
Yeah. But he noticed the medallion, and he's like, "I'm not gonna help you get it off."
Oh, Rand insists at some point, "If you think I'll help you get that fox head away from Matt, you can think again. He paid a hard price for it, Moraine, and it is his."
My phone keeps going to sleep and then disconnecting me.
And then kind of toward the end, Rand is being dismissive. He's like, "We'll talk about it tomorrow. It's the middle of the night. I'm not doing this right now, and I'm not giving you the thing that Matt has. I'm not going to help you do that, so just forget it." Which isn't what she's talking about at all. And He's just misunderstanding. And then, please, Rand, Moraine said, and the open pleading in her voice halted him in his tracks. He had never heard anything like that from her before. The tone seemed to offend Lan, and he says, I thought you had become a man, the warder said harshly. Is this how a man behaves? You act more like an arrogant boy. Lan practiced the sword with him, and liked him, Rand thought, but if Moraine said the right word, the warder would do his best to kill him. I will not be with you forever, Moraine said urgently. I just marked that little part to read. Reiterates what we were talking about, I believe, in the previous chapter, or in the chapters that we've recorded around here. Forgive me if that's not quite right.
It pops in and out on the various chapters.
Yeah, that Moraine believes that any day now she may die a forever death. Not just go to a different place, but be dead forever. It's a strong possibility. And the anxiety bleeds through in these scenes at the beginning of this book. She knows what's about to happen. And she wants to warn him about these really critical things, like don't just go using balefire willy-nilly. You could destroy everything, and then there will be nothing to save. But he won't listen.
You can't always, yeah, and you can never impart all of your knowledge to somebody.
Yeah, she's just trying to get as much through now because she knows she's about to go.
Yeah, and I think he talks about that, how she's like cramming things into his head as much as possible. She's just constantly like behind him and lecturing and being like, all right, here's how you deal with nobles. Here's how you deal with, politics. Here's how you deal with the game of houses. Here's all this stuff, various rules. And she has so much to tell him. And later he is like very happy. He's like, oh, thank God for all the information she put into my head. Otherwise I wouldn't be able to deal with these kings and nobles as well as I do. But at the same time, like,
yeah,
I think it's a little annoying. I mean, what 20-year-old wants to be lectured day in and day out, right? Like, nobody.
Forget being 20. Yeah, everyone hates that. Right. But, and then Rand starts up this old argument again where he's like, it's hard to trust you, Moraine. You've handled me like a puppet, made me dance the way you wanted. And Moraine's like, dance the way you want? Dance the way I wanted. It's been more like wrestling a bear than pulling strings on a puppet. And she was like, do you want an oath that I won't try manipulating you? Here you go. She's like, just listen. Please.
Because let's be honest, if he did what she wanted, they'd be in the White Tower right now.
That's true. Not a good place to be right now. Or ever.
No, ever. Not for Rand, anyway. Not till Egwene purges the tower.
And not for Moraine.
Even then, that's a good point, too. Yeah, she may have been stilled right along with Suan. They knew her part and everything. Yeah, totally.
Because Elida knows that she was a part of it. It's just that Moraine never comes back to the tower.
Right. She never really comes back from the waste.
Yeah.
Sniff.
I even swear to obey you like one of the maidens, like one of the Gaishane if you require, but you must. Taking a deep breath, she began again more softly. I ask you humbly to allow me to help you. Lan was staring at her, and Rand thought his own eyes must be popping out of his head. I will accept your help, he said slowly, and I apologize, too, for all the rudeness I've shown. And then, finally, Moraine gets to do her explanation. She's saying, what you used to kill the dark hounds is called balefire. She's like, I can still sense it. I know that's what it was. And then she explains that since before the breaking of the world, this has been anathema. Channelers do not do this. She's like, even the Forsaken don't use this.
And yet she's used it at least twice that I can think of.
Right. Rand says, forbidden. I saw you use it once. And Moraine simply says, sometimes it's necessary to do that which is forbidden. Which, I mean, Moraine did exactly what he just did, right? She killed Darkhounds with balefire.
Balefire, totally.
Oh, and she killed Bilal, thank you.
Yeah, I made sure to write that down in my notes to be like, she killed Bilal. Because I knew that would come up. And so she can knock somebody back a few seconds at most, but with his power, especially we see later when he takes out Ravine, is minutes to maybe nearly an hour. Yes.
And Moraine also, she gets at that a bit, and she also says, if you were holding Kalandor, you could wipe a city off the map for way before when you actually strike it. She's saying, and you can't just do that. She goes on to explain why you can't just use balefire like that.
And we see very real consequences of the use of balefire. We see a balefire scream that happens before he takes out Natrum's barrow. We actually see the flattening of the world, which is just crazy. That's the balefire scream. We see the black cracks that are slowly destroying the pattern. And essentially the use of balefire is what kills Egwene in the end, because she has to counteract that through the flame of Tarvalin.
Yes.
You know, so like really, if you want to talk about like the one thing that really, I mean, who's the only main Two Rivers character who really dies? It's Egwene. And what kills her? Balefire. So, you know, it's a legit warning. And of course, at the end of this book, we see the most drastic effect of balefire, which is the return of Avienda, Asmodean, and Matt, plus a whole bunch of other people to life through the balefiring of Ravine.
And then Rand simply declares, I have to check on someone, he went on quietly. I will see you in the morning. Gathering the power into him, life and death in swirling layers, he made a hole in the air taller than he was, opening into the blackness that made the moonlight seem like day. A gateway, Asmodean called it. What is that? Moraine gasped. Once I've done something, I remember how, most of the time. He knows that's not an answer. But Rand just made a gateway, and no one has made a gateway ever in the world since, the Forsaken, I'm sure have, but for thousands of years, no one knew how to do this.
Well, and in his various fights with the Forsaken, hasn't he, he observed Asmodean creating a gateway. He saw the residue of those weaves.
Yes, and then doesn't he grab it and hold it open or something like that?
Yeah, totally.
So he learns it, basically.
Perhaps. He sees the result. He doesn't necessarily see it being woven. He's definitely woven a gateway to skimming. He's figured out how to do a skimming gateway when he was chasing Asmodean into the waste. And I think that's where he says, that's where I've done this once before.
Didn't he do it in... Wait a minute. Did he do it in book 1? No. That was in the dream. Yeah,
he's definitely gone into the dream before, but I'm not sure if in the flesh. I'm not sure if he's done that. I'm trying to remember the last time he went into the dream in the flesh.
I'm thinking of in the fight with Ishmael in book 1.
Oh, where there's
at the end.
Yeah, but I feel like that's Ishmael pulling him into a dream shard.
Yeah, it's a confusing scene where it's hard to say what's in the dream and what isn't.
And certainly book 2 is also in the dream, but that has a lot to do with the blowing of the horn, where it sort of brings Teleron Rayad into the real world. And he climbs the staircase in the smoke to fight in the clouds. And then book 3 is very much the real world, even though, book 3, that's where it is, because at the end of book 3, Moraine balefires Balal, and then Rand grabs Kalendor, and Ishmael flees into Teleron Rayad, and Rand creates a gateway to Teleron Rayad to chase him. But he has Kalendor, which makes him a little crazy.
Yes. And in any case, Rand can now, at will, skim, as opposed to proper traveling, which is a little bit more complex.
Right. Can he go into the world of dreams in the flesh at will, or is that still something that he hasn't figured out yet, long term?
I think, with the weaves that he knows, he could. I don't know that he would know to do that, though. I don't know that he understands that the world of dreams is a place that you can go to out when you're not asleep.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
I don't think he has a very good understanding of that yet.
And then my other question is, where do you think the original idea for creating a skimming gateway came from? Do you think that's all LTT and Madness coming out and some of his first channeling? Or is that the talent of someone who's just has a lot of power, and as we see with Nynaeve and a few of the other characters, they're able to spontaneously basically invent powerful weaves on the spot. Like, we've seen that a few times with Nynaeve, where she just comes up with things. We see it with Avienda. Avienda creates a gateway on pure instinct.
A proper gateway, too.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, when I say proper gateway, I mean for traveling, not for...
skimming.
Yeah. Which is, skimming is kind of the shorthand of traveling. But to answer your question, I guess I have to say I'm not sure. And I don't think Rand fully understands what he's doing. We do see here, Rand stepped through the gateway and it vanished. And after that, we see that him kind of recounting to himself a conversation he had with Asmodean about it, where Asmodean said, like, yeah, that's a thing and there's a faster way, but I can't show you how to do it with how little power I have to use, which I frankly believe.
Absolutely. And we've also talked about how, possibly skimming is just moving through Teleron Riyadh, basically entering the world of dreams in the flesh, just a void area of it, because, like, you control it with your mind, you create the step, like all that kind of stuff. The traveling is very similar. And so maybe the weave for skimming and the weave for going into the Teleron Riyadh in the flesh are closer to the weave for creating a gateway. But they all seem very close, just with small alterations between them.
Yeah. Rand makes the gateway, jumps on the disc, which is currently in the shape of the Aes Sedai symbol, or the ancient Aes Sedai symbol, the black and white.
And he's heading to check on Asmodean, so he's just going a couple of 1,000 yards, maybe?
Yeah. He's thinking that Asmodean may have been attacked as well. Or an attempted assassination on Asmodean, as well as Matt and himself.
Mm-hmm. And he's also checking on the Choden Cal.
And when Rand arrives, he sees footprints of 3 or 4 dark hounds that had been outside of the doorway. But the Shadow Spawn did not, it looks like, try to enter, or... Yeah, he's confused about what happened. He can see their footprints leading up to the doorway, but then they're gone. And he's wondering if his ward on the room destroyed them.
I always thought it was more like they just weren't that interested in Asmodean. And the ward was enough to just keep him out.
Yeah, I don't know. We know it's meant to keep out any man who can channel. Or keep in men who can channel. In this case, I don't know enough about it to make a call on this. I don't understand what happened to the Dark Hounds here.
I think they had a different goal. I just don't think he was there.
In any case, Rand uses Weaves of Earth to remove the footprints because he doesn't want anyone to question why the Dark Hounds would have been interested in Asmodean at all.
Which is a cool use of the one power, by the way, to make the footprints like pop back out again in stone.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, I like that too.
He lifted up the compressions. Like, I don't know. That was always like a really cool use of I feel like we see a lot of use of the fire. We see a lot of use of spirit. We see a lot of use of air. But I feel like water and earth don't get used quite as much. And so I like to see Earth, especially, in these situations.
So Rand is checking on the hidden Choden Call that he has hidden behind a false wall made out of the power. And the next thing I have is Lanfear showing up. As he's alone there in the room.
Yep, that's me too. I mean, he has the flashback and thinks about the little girl that he, and his experience with Kalendor.
Right.
And we talked about how that's, Kalendor makes him a little more insane and makes him think he can do things he can't actually do.
Yeah. What are you doing there? A woman's voice said as the wall became apparently whole again. Rand just re-hid the Choden Call. Tying off the flows...
She clearly saw both.
Yeah, I think she did. Tying off the flows hastily, and the knot with its own deadly surprises, he pulled the power into him and turned. Beside Lanfear, in her white and silver, Elaine or Min or Avienda would look almost ordinary. Her dark eyes alone were enough to make a man give up his soul, At the sight of her, his stomach clenched until he wanted to vomit. "What do you want?" he demanded. Once, he had blocked Egwene and Elaine both from the true source, but he could not remember how. So long as Lanfear could touch the source, he had more chance of catching the wind in his hands than of holding her prisoner. One flash of balefire and... he couldn't do it. She was one of the Forsaken, but the memory of a woman's head rolling on the ground stopped him dead. "You have two of them," she said finally. "I thought I glimpsed... one is a woman, isn't it?" Her smile could have halted a man's heart and made him grateful. "You are beginning to consider my plan, aren't you? With those together, with the other chosen will kneel at our feet. We can supplant the great lord himself, challenge the creator. You were always ambitious, Moraine." His voice grated in his ears. "Why do you think I turned away from you? It wasn't Ilyena, whatever you like to think. You were out of my heart long before I ever met her. Ambition is all there is to you. Power is all you ever wanted. You disgust me." She stared at him, both hands pressed hard against her stomach, her dark eyes even larger than usual. "Grendel said," she began finally, swallowing. She began, "Lews Therin? I love you, Lews Therin. I have always loved you, and I always will. You know that. You must." Rand's face was like rock. He hoped it hid his shock. He had no idea where his words had come from, but it seemed he could remember her. A dim memory from before. "I am not Lews Therin Telamon. I'm Rand al'Thor," he said harshly. "Of course you are." Studying him, she nodded slowly to herself. That cool composure returned. Thought I'd leave that there.
So I just want to state that I think the memory of the woman's head rolling is the caravan. Remember when he killed the Dark Friends with the Grey Man hiding among them in book 2? Or no, that was book 3, The Dragon Reborn. That's right.
He beheads each of them.
Right.
One being a woman.
And that's when he's really, really in the clutches of, I think we called it mostly stress insanity, more so than taint and insanity. But, man, that was a rough time for him.
Yeah, I like this. Lumen is saying the irony is that in all these scenes he is LTT, no matter how much he rejects it. And I agree with that. He is LTT.
Absolutely.
He's the same soul, he's just in a new body.
And he has a new mind that's been raised by a different, raised by Tam al'Thor, and Rand is different in that way. And he even says it. He's like, "It was me. The only difference is this time I was raised better."
Yeah.
And that's an important difference. But he's still the same person. And, I always say Matt's an example of someone who acquires other people's memories, but still stays the same person. Rand acquires LTT's memories, but he has an insane man in his head who's not actually real.
I agree. The memories are just starting to bleed through. Memories which no one is ever supposed to have or get. Mm-hmm. He's just, because of the taint.
Yeah. Well, and that's what makes him the Dragon Reborn, right? As opposed to just some hero, right? He gets the memories of LTT.
Yes.
And once he fully integrates the memories of LTT, he stops calling himself the Dragon Reborn and just starts calling himself the Dragon.
And I feel like it's important here to point out that in that scene, in the prologue that I was referencing earlier in this episode, when we see the 4 Forsaken discussing Rand al'Thor, we even see one of them say, and I can't remember which one, that he's Lews Therin Telamon Reborn, not just the dragon. Who knows what that means? Or something along those lines.
I think that was Grendel. But
the implication being that this has never happened before. There's a dragon every turning, but the dragon is different usually. This time, it's not. It's the same dragon. Back to finish what he didn't finish. Essentially.
Totally. And so Lanfear's like, "Oh, you're considering my plan?" And he's like, "No, I'm going to cleanse the source, you bitch."
Right.
And that's where the memories really come forward, where he starts calling her Moraine, and he's like, his voice gets a little deeper, it grates in his ears. Like, that's really where this intense memory from being Lews Therin comes through, and he almost responds the way Lews Therin would.
I gotta say, it is very satisfying to watch Rand just dress her down in that scene, like, like, new recruit that's not getting anything right. She's just like, yeah, your ambition is all that you have, it's all that you are, and that's why I don't want you. It's not because Ilyena got in the way, it's because you're a bad person.
It's like when someone's like, you just dumped me for your new girlfriend. You're like, dude, I dumped you long before I met her. Like, we were done. Like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Like, but of course, she has motivated reasoning where she's like, oh, well, you can't actually remember that, right? You can't actually be LTT. You're not. So therefore, this must be word of mouth, Asmodean's telling you stories, and you're just making this up to get in my head. And it's just like the ultimate motivated reasoning. I love it. It's such a good, like...
Yeah, she tries to justify that it wasn't really him saying that. He's just angry and saying what he thinks will hurt her. And that's her way of soothing herself, I think. Because she wouldn't want to believe that Lews Therin actually thought that. Although he did, obviously.
Obviously, yeah. Oh, good follow-up from Cody showing us the scene that Rand actually does learn the gateway to...
Oh, yes.
The gateway to Tel'aran'rhiod from Ravine? Yeah. Is that later in this book?
This is... Just reading off my screen.
So he still doesn't know quite how to get to Tel'aran'rhiod in the flesh. He's learned how to skim.
Yeah, we've talked about this before, but I'm going to bring it up again. Is Rand a dreamer that never gets trained?
That was always my assumption, yeah. Is that you know, they talk about how Lews Therin was never quite as good as anyone else in the dream, but that clearly makes me think that he at least was a dreamer, even though the fact that Rand, like, mostly goes there in the flesh. And I think we see a lot more of Rand as a dreamer before he learns to ward his dreams. Once he wards his dreams, he seals himself in and the dreams out. And so he basically stops having prophetic dreams or accidentally dreamwalking at that point because he uses the one power to stop that from happening.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting, actually.
But before then, we see all sorts of scenes with him and Ishmael in the dream. And there may be some parallels there, too, because, you know, we know that those two are connected, and Ishmael we know is a dreamwalker, and especially later once he's reborn as Moradin, and they do the whole crossing the streams thing, they, you know, really do share a lot of abilities, including dreamwalking.
Oh, good point.
I also, you know, I often wonder how much of Rand's mood changes and stuff are actually Moradin's.
I think quite a bit.
Yeah.
They catch each other's moods accidentally and don't know that that's what's happening.
In a lot of the same way that I think Brigitte and Elaine mirror each other's moods.
Oh, good point. Good point.
I think there's a lot to be said for the Warder Bond does something to sort of merge threads together, or at least tie them together, in the same way that Crossing the Streams may have done something to merge Ishmael and Rand's threads together. But it's different.
At least in a similar way.
Yeah. It's a parallel type thing. They're not exactly the same. There's a lot of different rules, but there is that sort of connecting of threads that, you know, what happens to you also happens to me. I stab my hand, you feel that pain.
I told you not to harm him.
Exactly.
All that.
Meanwhile, he's like flexing his hand, being like, it hurts.
Yep.
And also part of the reason that Rand is able to be like, well, whatever, I lost a hand, it's no big deal, is it's not really his hand. He almost feels more at home in Moradin's body at that point. And I wonder how much he can actually feel Moradin's hand, and so he doesn't even it doesn't really even feel like he's lost a hand to him.
But Rand is different by then, and he loses his hand, is healed, so he's not just bleeding out. And obviously he doesn't get his hand back, and isn't like the first thing he says, like, I'll have to learn a sword fight with my left, I guess. Like, he's so, like, removed from the situation, you know? He's not mourning the loss of his hand at all. He's just...
No. And you can again argue how much of that's PTSD, how much of that's like continuous stress, how much of that is the insanity that he's dealing with, and how much of it is the fact that he's not physically inhabiting his own body. And I mean that in the most literal sense.
The shock of getting your hand blown off. They say, and it's true, that in situations where there's a serious accident and someone is very injured, it's usually the person who is very injured who's the calmest about the whole situation, and it's because shock. Because your brain does that awesome thing where in really critical moments, when you're in a lot of pain, you think very clearly. It's interesting.
Yeah, but I wonder how much of he seems to, like, literally not even feel the shock of someone who's lost a hand. He just seems to literally be like, oh yeah, it's like somebody else lost a hand. Like, you're aware of it, but... it's been a while since I read that part of the series, but I distinctly remember feeling a little weird about Rand's reaction, or lack thereof, maybe I should say. And I'm convinced part of that is because he's not in his own body. It's literally, at that point, Moradin's body.
I like it. I'm nodding to that one. Next thing I have in this scene is Rand asking, why are you even here? And Lanfear says, Ravine sent those dark hounds after you tonight. I would have come sooner to help you, but I cannot let the others know that I'm on your side.
Convenient excuse.
Yeah, Rand's like, why would Ravine choose now to attack me? He could have done it at any time. Why not any of the other Forsaken even?
And that's when we get I think we talked about this theory, or this story earlier.
Yes. Where Lanfear makes the case that it's in Ravine's interest to attack him at this point because you're impinging on his interests. You sent armies from Tyr toward Cairhien, and he wants Cairhien, so you're messing with him. So now he's messing with you.
And I buy it. I totally buy it.
I can't think of a better reason. I mean, I can't think of anything.
And to be honest, Lanfear doesn't do much lying to Rand, right? Like, she's just like, yeah, that's the truth.
Not that I can see. I want to find some subterfuge, some manipulation, but I can't think of anything.
No, she's like, come on, let's go take over the world together. You down? And he's like, no. And she's like, well, you should. We're going to do it anyway. Think about it.
Think about it. Your time's running out, kid.
You got a couple of... if we're going to take over the world together, you need a teacher. Here's a teacher. Oh, I see you have some powerful Angreal there. Sangreal. Sounds good. Yeah. We're doing this thing. And meanwhile, she's sort of off, back and forth, making plans with the Forsaken and plotting, and she's not always watching over Rand.
And the rest that I have up until the readout, which is like 2-ish pages at the end, is just this conversation between Rand and Lanfear. She says the stuff about the opposing soldiers, you're impinging on his interests, that's why he did that. She says, you've been wording your dreams against me, and he says, against everyone, not just you.
And that's true, even though she's, like he says, high on the list of people.
Yeah. And then she basically says, like, these dreamers on the side of the light, they suck, they don't know what they're doing. She says, I've looked into the dreams of the wise ones, and they don't know anything.
Which really does tell you the level at which she's able to operate in the worlds of dreams. Like, if she can spy on the Dreamwalkers, Lanfear is pretty goddamn skilled. We have a couple of people in Tel'aran'rhiod that always say, like, oh, Tel'aran'rhiod belongs to me. Lanfear, Moghedien.
Probably the most skilled in the world. More skilled than Slayer. Lanfear.
Who is? Oh, Lanfear. Yeah, totally.
Fair even. Who, lives there.
I think,
maybe Perrin at the end.
Maybe Perrin at the end.
Her.
Maybe Moradin, but he more does his, Dream Shard thing, and he doesn't, participate in general Tel'aran'rhiod. He just makes his own little pocket worlds and sulks in them.
Yes.
Grendal's pretty good, but she's definitely behind both Moghedien and Lanfear. Messana sucks. She gets her mind broken. But yeah, I think between Moghedien and Lanfear, they both think they're better. But I gotta say, I do think that Lanfear is more skilled. Moghedien might be able to find places to hide, but I think Lanfear is like way more skilled at actually manipulating dreams in the world of dreams,
using force and things. Yeah.
Yeah, so I just want to say one particular thing, because we have not heard much about Egwene and her Gawain-Galad relationship. Up to this point, I can't think of anything that hasn't been Galad first, Gawain second.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And so this is really the first clue here that I feel like this is the first time in this book where Jordan commits to saying, hey, she's actually more interested in Gawain than Galad.
Yeah.
Even though she's been clearly flirting with both this whole time. And I don't, I wanted to bring this up just because, fuck Gawain. But also, this is something we've been looking for, and Lanfear drops this clue right in our lap.
Lumen saying they would rather Egwene had gone for Galad, and I just want to tell you, Lumen, we have talked about that many times in the past. Wrong brother. They're both kind of asses, but Galad is the better one.
I just think the head of the White Cloaks and the head of the Aes Sedai would have been the perfect fucking match. Interesting.
Yes, interesting.
In terms of, redeeming the White Cloaks.
Yes, Obscure. One is less of an ass. And therefore the preferable brother.
And he clearly has no problem with Aes Sedai. He grew up with them, even though he is able to sort of take that tenet out of one of the foundation of the White Cloaks, of the hatred of the Aes Sedai. He's able to sort of reform the group a little bit.
Yeah, that channeling isn't the shadow. They're not the same at all. I have watched the girl's dreams, too. Egwene. Once I thought you had feelings for her. Do you know who she dreams of? Morghase's son and stepson. The son Gawain, most often. Smiling, she put on a tone of mock shock. You would not believe a simply country girl could have such dreams. She was trying to test his jealousy, he realized. She really thought he worded his dreams to hide thoughts of another woman. The maidens guard me closely, he said dryly. If you want to know how close, look at Isandra's dreams. Spots of color flared in his cheeks. Of course, he was not supposed to see what she was trying. Confusion rolled outside the void. Or did she think Isandra? Lanfear knew she was a dark friend. Lanfear had brought Kadir and the woman to the waste in the first place, and planted most of the jewelry Isandra was accused of stealing. Lanfear's spite was cruel, even when petty. Still, if she thought he could love her, Isandra being a dark friend was probably no obstacle in her eyes. I should have let them send her off to try reaching the Dragon Wall, he went on casually, but who knows what she might have said to save herself. I must protect her and Kadir to some extent, in order to protect Asmodean. The color faded, but as she opened her mouth again, a knock came at the door. Rand bounded to his feet. No one would recognize Lanfear, yet, if a woman were discovered in his room, a woman whom none of the maidens below had seen enter, questions would be asked that he had no answers for. But Lanfear already had a gateway open, to somewhere full of white silk hangings and silver. Remember that I am your only hope of surviving, my love. It was a very cool voice in which to call someone that. Beside me, you need fear nothing. Beside me, you can rule everything that is or will be. Lifting her snowy skirts, she stepped through, and the gateway winked shut. The knock sounded again before he could make himself push away Saidin and haul open the door. Anila peered past him suspiciously, muttering, I thought perhaps Isandra. She gave him an accusing look. Spear Sisters are searching everywhere for you. No one saw you return. With a shake of her head, she straightened. She always tried to stand as tall as possible. Is she the short one? I think she's the short one. Anyway.
Definitely the short one, yeah.
The chiefs have come to speak with the Kyra Karn, she said formally. They wait below. They waited on the columned portico, as it turned out, being men. The sky was still dark, but the first glimmers of dawn lined the mountains to the east. If they felt any impatience with the two maidens who stood between them and the tall doors, it did not show on their shadowed faces. The Shaido are moving, Han barked as soon as Rand appeared. and the Rain, the Miagoma, the Xiand, every clan. Joining Couladin or me? Rand demanded. The Shaido are moving toward Jangai Pass, Ruark said. For the others, it is still too early to tell, but they are on the march, with every spear not needed to defend the holds, herds, and flocks. Rand only nodded. All of his determination not to let anyone else dictate what he would do, and now this. Whatever the other clans intended, Couladin had to plan a crossing into Cairhien. So much for his grand schemes of imposing peace. If the Shaido ravaged Cairhien even further while he sat in Ruidian waiting for the other clans. Then we move for Jangai too, he said finally. We cannot catch him if he means to cross, Aram cautioned, and Hod added sourly, if any of the others are joining him, we will be caught strung out like blindworms in the sun. I won't sit here until I find out, Rand said. If I can't catch Couladin, I mean to be right behind him into Cairhien. Rouse the spears. We leave as soon as after first light as you can manage. Giving him that odd Aiel bow used only on the most formal occasions, 1 foot forward, and 1 hand extended, the chiefs departed. Only Han said anything. To Shale Ghul itself.
I didn't really have much to say about that, other than, obviously the Spear Sisters didn't see him return because he used a gateway. They're going to have to get used to that.
Yeah.
They don't see him coming or going, which the fact that he does that leads directly to the box. The fact that he disappears sometimes is actually a problem for him. He really should do a better job of keeping the...
Yeah, duh. In 3 chapters, I have the same thing to say to Elaine and Nynaeve. Just bring Tom and Julian.
Right.
They at least can watch and return if something bad happens.
Right?
You can't do it all yourself, guys. Stop trying. Just people are offering to help you. Just say yes.
The greatest works of people are done by the cooperation of men and women.
And we see this over and over with Nynaeve and Rand. Whenever they try to do something alone, it's usually Nynaeve shutting down Tom and Julian or whatever other man is nearby. She's like, what do you know, you dumb man? And Rand is almost as bad, or probably at least as bad, when he thinks he doesn't want the women helping him because they're soft pretties who could potentially get hurt, and he doesn't want to put them in that situation. Well, you know what? So are you, Rand. You can also be hurt, so you might as well bring as big of a group as you can.
Let go. Let other people be heroes, too.
Yeah. You can't do this alone. Well, he'll keep trying for another couple books, but...
Yeah, how many books do we have left? Because...
what are we... this is 5? 5. This is book 5.
So we got 9 books of him trying to do it alone until...
More or less, yeah.
Damn it, Rand. It's amazing. So much has happened. So much happens in the first 6 books. I really do think of that as the first half of the series. Even though there's in terms of book number, it really is the first third, maybe?
Yeah, so we're almost 30% done. Because we're, a third of the way through book 5, or not even a third yet.
So I guess when we finish book 5, we'll be more than a third. I mean, if you want to count New Spring, that's exactly a third of the books. There's so much that we're just starting to get into that I'm excited to really dig into in depth. Especially when we start getting...
Siege of Cairhien.
Yeah.
It's coming. It's coming.
That's exciting. Matt getting lucky. Just all the politics. And yes, exciting chapters like that, but also the super exciting politics between the kin and the sea folk, and pulling all that apart and being this is why those characters are mad at each other. I'm super excited to bring that up and have people who, frankly, are why am I reading this? To be oh, because this is why he's showing you the background of these characters and why you might really be interested in them.
That's why I'm pretty excited to get to the so-called slog as well, because I feel like we're going to actually have the most to say about that.
Yeah, totally.
About the subtle political machinations. There's just a lot more to talk about when things are subtle. When, we say this all the time, but when a whole chapter is just about and then Rand murdered a bunch of mofos and blew stuff up, there's actually not a lot to say about that. It's just the text, But when, someone nods and winks and ruler dies on the other side of the world, there's a lot to say about how that happened, you know.
And this is one of those chapters where I feel like Jordan is really mastering both. There's cool scenes with the dark hounds getting chopped to pieces with a flame sword and flowing away from the symbol in the center, and then you've got Lanfear showing up and being all cryptic. And that's one of my favorite things about Lan. She's such an effective story device in book 2 through 5, where she likes to pop in, make some cryptic statements, and then disappear again, and like give you all sorts of clues and ideas, and really sort of. But oftentimes they're in the middle of action scenes because she's so badass. She just like watches Rand kill something, whether it's Grolm or take out Asmodean or Dark Hounds. She's just watching him be badass and being like, yeah, that's cool. Can you do it with twice as many?
Mm-hmm. That's pretty funny, Lumen.
Thank you for listening to the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Rate us in the Apple Podcast app or support us on Patreon. Is that good enough?